the Woman in the Arts panel discussion. And I would like to introduce our moderator, Sheila White, the co-director of the Arts Lehigh, who got to do the introductions and will moderate the panel. Thank you very much. And please, after the panel is ended, we are having a reception upstairs. Therefore, we will have some refreshment and you can enjoy the work of our special guest of honor, Janet Fish. Of course, the work of Lucy Gang, so you cannot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And to start off this panel discussion, I think it would be wise of me to tell you about some biographical backgrounds of the people on this panel. And I must be honest, as I was compiling the biographies of my colleagues and friends up here on the campus, I first don't know when they all sleep. And secondly, I'm intimidated by their experience and professionalism and the things that they do very much. So I'm honored to be representing the gallery as a moderator for this discussion. But more than that, I think there's a wonderful opportunity for us to understand the individuals up here on the panel, their personal creative process, and how this is a bigger piece of the idea of the women in the arts, and what does that mean on so many different levels. First, I'm going to start off with a biography for Nadine Stein, who sits to my left. In August of 1980, I'm not loud enough? No. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. In August of 1980, Nadine Stein joined the faculty at Lehigh University as an instructor, having just completed coursework for the PhD at New York University. 3 years later, that degree was granted for her dissertation entitled The Evolution of Symphonic Worlds, Tonality in the Symphonies of Gustav Mahler, and she was promoted to the rank of assistant professor. She was tenured in 1989, along with the promotion to associate professor, followed by full professor in 1996. From 1992 to 2006, she has served as department chair, leading the music department in a period of tremendous growth surrounding the move into the Zollner Arts Center in 1997. Dr. Stein's scholarly activity has centered around the music and culture of the turn of the century. In addition to her work on Gustav Mahler, she has presented papers at the National Meeting of the American Musicological Society and published articles on Strauss, as well as early Schoenberg. In 2003, her entry on Alma Mahler in Women Composers Music Through the Ages, Volume 7 was published, and in 2004, she delivered a paper on Alma Mahler and Amy Beach at the 7th International Festival of Women Composers Conference at Indiana University of Pennsylvania and Carnegie Mellon. Music of these women composers, Alma Mahler and Amy Beach, will be featured on concerts presented by the music department this semester. Dr. Stein has performed extensively with choral ensembles at the university, in the community, and professionally. For 2 years, she was a DJ on the weekly program of classical music on WDIY-FM, the Lehigh Valley's first public radio station, and she has often written program notes and offered pre-concert lectures for professional ensembles in the state, particularly for visiting orchestras at the Zollner Arts Center. Gotta practice my radio. This semester, Dr. Stein is teaching a special course on women in music. Next, I will feature Linda Ganis to my direct left. Linda Ganis is a graduate of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, majoring in flute performance, and is an active as a musician and artist in the New York metropolitan and Lehigh Valley areas. Presently, on the adjunct faculty at Moravian College and Lehigh University, Linda has also taught at the Spence School, Independent Schools Orchestra, and Bloomingdale House of Music in New York City, as well as the Königs Musikschule in Bern, Switzerland, where she has lived for 2 years. She is a member of the Bach Festival Orchestra of Bethlehem and the Lake George Opera Festival. Other professional engagements have included the New York City Opera National Company, Bronx Arts Festival, New York Lyric Opera, Greater Bridgeport Symphony, and Stanford Chamber Orchestra, among others, hence the no sleep. Linda has performed in Broadway pit orchestras, recorded on the RCA and Dorian labels, and enjoys freelancing on flute and piccolo in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania region. And Linda has also studied drawing and painting at the New York Studio School and the New York Academy of Art, and is currently completing her Master of degree at Union University and Institute at Vermont College. Recently, she was chosen to be a participant in the New York Studio School Drawing Marathon held in Orvieto, Italy, and taught by Graham Nixon, Dean of the New York Studio School. In recent years, she has received 2 full fellowships for residencies at the Vermont Studio Center. She has received Best in Show awards at exhibits held at Lehigh University and Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, among others, and is a member of New Century Artists Gallery in New York. Her work has been commissioned by organizations such as the New York Philharmonic, David Sarnoff Research Center, Musical America, G. Schirmer Incorporated, and Kinhaven Music Institute, as well as numerous private collectors. Linda does most of the graphic design work for the music department, such as posters, postcards, and other promotional materials for concerts and the faculty artists. To my far left and one over, Ruth Knapo-Seton. As writer-in-residence of the Berman Center, Dr. Ruth Knapo-Seton teaches courses in Jewish literature, women's literature, and creative writing, and plans programs that bring other Jewish writers to campus. The descendant of Kabbalists, visionaries, artists, musicians, and martyrs, Ruth was born in Safi, Morocco. Her first novel, The Road to Fez, was published by Counterpoint Press in March 2001. She gives many readings, lectures, and writing workshops at universities, conferences, reading groups, and book clubs. She holds a PhD in English from Rice University. The recipient of literary fellowships from the NEA, Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, Sewanee Writers Conference, PEN, VCCA, and McDowell Writers Colony, among others, she has published fiction, poetry, and creative nonfiction in many journals and anthologies, including Becoming Myself, Growing Up a Female, Best Contemporary Jewish Writing, the North American Review, Nimrod, Tycoon, and other Chicago magazines, as well as Wrestling with Zion and The Flying Camel. To my far left, Lucy Gans. Lucy Gans is a Lehigh University professor of art and teaches sculpture, drawing, and women's studies. Professor Gans received her BFA at Lake Erie College in Painesville, Ohio, and her MFA from Pratt Institute, Brooklyn, New York. She came to Lehigh in 1977 and has been chairwoman of the Department of Art and Architecture twice, as well as director of the Women's Studies program. I don't know why. Okay, it's okay. She has also taught at Vermont College in Montpelier, Westtown School in Weston, Pennsylvania, University of Alabama in Mobile, and Lake Erie College. And if you haven't seen her work up in the galleries, and it may be a little bit difficult to hear her work here in the din of the crowd, I encourage you to come back and experience it in a private manner. It's a wonderful and very moving experience. And finally, our guest artist, Janet Fish. Janet Fish is known for her richly colored still-life paintings and prints, often depicting domestic interiors and objects. She has noted that the still-life genre offers both realism and abstraction, and her use of transparent objects, particularly glass, provides a masterful sense of depth and volume. Fish was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and raised on the island of Bermuda. Her mother was a sculptor and potter, and her father taught art history. She was also inspired by her grandfather, American Impressionist painter Clark Voorhees. She studied sculpture and printmaking at Smith College and received her BFA and Master of Fine Arts from Yale University School of Art and Architecture, one of the first women to do so. She was strongly influenced in the movement of light and depiction by objects of Alex Katz, Joseph Alberts at Yale, and was a student of another American master, Philip Pearlstein. Fish has been influenced by feminist ideas. In the late 1960s, women artists were underrepresented in museums and academia, and she was advised to seek teaching positions at women's schools. Her meticulous rendering of domestic objects could have been construed as mere female household items at the time. The work of Janet Fish has been shown in major art venues throughout the world, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Whitney Museum of American Art, and Art Institute of Chicago, not to forget Lehigh University Art Galleries, and is included in numerous public and private collections internationally. Her awards include the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in 1994 and several McDowell Fellowships. Please welcome our panel. And now I'm just going to throw it out. Collectively, yes, Lucy.
I'm sorry. There are a couple of empty seats here, and I see a lot of people standing. I know you don't like to sit in the front, but there are like six.
We have two up in the front here, two up in the front here, one on the side. Don't be shy. We promise we'll let you out for cookies and punch. Anyone else want some more comfort? Relocation? I'm going to let it response to you. I don't think we need to have any formal particular order, but I'm just going to throw out a general question for all to answer. In your personal or individual research and practice, how has the stereotypical perception of women in the arts influenced or provoked your own work? You might want to talk about what the stereotypical perception of women in the arts is.
I guess the writer has to start. I guess that, of course, it has to affect a woman artist, no matter what discipline she's working in. And I just want to say that I was a DJ too for a while, and I have worked in play, and I'm writing about a jazz musician right now, so I feel like I'm on every level a little bit. But as I was just talking to one of my students today who was asking me how I managed to write and raise 3 children and work full-time all the time, you know, and I think it's a matter of just fighting the stereotypical perception and just trying to keep this, I guess, balance on a tightrope is what it is. And really, sometimes you do it better than other times. You know, sometimes you can balance yourself better than other times. Sometimes the mother part wins out, sometimes the daughter part, sometimes the wife part, sometimes the professor part, sometimes the writer part. But in the end, they all have to somehow, it's like juggling and keeping up all these balls in the air, and you have to keep them all up because they're all part of your life. But one thing I would like to say, and I think probably all of you will respond to that being a woman artist, in a sense you are, the stereotype I think of the woman is the nurturing creature very often, not just, I'm going to look at it in a sort of positive way. You nurture, you connect with other people. And if I have to say that there's something that does maybe differentiate or that the woman artist accentuates more than other artists is that sense of having to connect, of not just nurturing, but being nurtured by relationships, so that you are never really alone. Your art is very consciously connecting to other people, whether it's through light, through music, through words, through whatever it is. You're connecting on in all the ways that a woman does through relationships. It's not an adversarial relationship with your art. At least I don't think it usually is. It's something that is very much connected and juggling. I think I'll just throw that out and let everyone else.
Sorry. I think, for me, it sort of started in school, in graduate school particularly. That I, instead of sort of deciding what it would mean to be a woman artist, it was a period of time where I pretended not to be. I made sure that I took foundry and welding. I got licensed in Brooklyn as a welder in case I needed a backup job. Things like that in graduate school in New York City. I lived in a horrendous neighborhood in Brooklyn. It's beautiful now. But I think that when I was in school, the issue of being a woman in sculpture, particularly at the time, was sort of they were mutually exclusive terms. You couldn't do it. So, you know, I always wore jeans anyway, but I wore jeans, I wore work boots, I wore heavy gloves, I did all of this. And sort of halfway through my MFA program, I'm going, you know, first of all, I can't even lift the crucible. It is so heavy. I'm sure it's stuck. That's the thing you're melting the bronze in. I couldn't lift it, and I'm pretty strong. And so I went and I changed my work almost completely over to figurative drawing, modeling, process work. And instead of working in bronze and welding steel and fiberglass and all of the materials that were supposed to be used, I was working in fabric and wood and found objects and things along the line. And my graduate professor refused to go to my school. That was, it was like, do this or something. So I found other people. It was fine. But I think that it started out for me as a reaction that I was going to be, I wasn't going to be a woman artist. I was going to be an artist. And I was going to do just exactly the same thing they were doing, and I was going to do it better, and I was going to stay at the foundry as late as they could. I certainly couldn't drink as much as they could, but I probably tried, etc. But then, found that it wasn't for me, and my work has slowly evolved and always been sort of centered on my own life and centered on my own perception. My children, my sense of environment, my sense of belonging, my sense of sort of collegiality, my sense of being a woman in this society. So,
finish off the table. I think that one of the things as an artist is, finding who you are, your own voice, as they say, and being a woman is part of that. So that's hopefully going to come into it. Certainly, the amount of discouragement that at the time I was in school that you received as a woman artist, especially once you get in, right from college, I'm into graduate school, but I thought, in a sense, was very freeing. I think some of my other friends kind of agreed with me. Indifference is extremely frees you up to do precisely what you feel like doing. And at the point, I think it was my last year at Yale, that I decided that I wanted to stop being abstract and paint from what I saw. I needed to bring other information into my head. That was the moment when everybody stopped talking to me, and it was fine. And so if you were saying I think that would be the biggest thing about being a woman artist, how it affected me.
I think for me, it really started early. I mean, when I was going to choose the instrument that I was going to play, they've done a lot of studies that instruments are very there's a lot of gender stereotypes about girls should play flute and boys should play drums. So when I told my parents I was interested in studying music after the symphony had come to our school, I was trotted next door to the neighbors, and they had 3 girls, and they played flute, clarinet, and violin. And okay, out of those 3, those are the instruments that you were going to pick. So I didn't really think about it at the time, but the steering of women begins very early. It did at the time. I mean, this was in the early 70s, late 60s. I think it's improved, and it's not so shocking to see women brass players. We have some in our own orchestra at Lehigh, but a lot is taken for granted that I think parents have to be very watchful not to, something so innocent as that. And it continues, but it gets an early start sometimes. So I guess that was the first thing that happened along the way.
My position has been a little bit different from these creative artists and professionally performing artists, in that I am not either of those. I do sing, obviously, with the Lehigh groups and elsewhere, but professionally I've become an academic, and Ruth mentioned the nurturing role. when I think about my own history, I can't really recall feeling that I had been prohibited from any activity because of being a woman. I will say that when I came to Lehigh in 1980, this was not long after Lehigh had become co-ed, and when I would go into the faculty dining room, the assumption was that I was the secretary. And at the new faculty dinner, the then provost introduced me and said, this is Nadine Stein, and he asked where cosine was. And I said, there isn't one at the moment. So when I've considered my own role in my department, where I was the only full-time woman member of the department for many, many years, I've always had to try and sort out if I was having an issue, was it because I was the only woman in the department, or I was the only one who wasn't a performer and wasn't directing an ensemble. So I've wondered that at various times. I think mostly it was that I felt that I had a scarlet A for academic on my chest. And so I was sort of relegated to certain tasks and so on because I was the academic in the department. But then in terms of my role in the department, I was chair for 14 years. And one of the things that I'm raising in my Women in Music course is not only issues about the performers and the players, the singers and the players and the conductors and the composers, but also all the many women who are behind the scenes and who facilitate the formation of symphony orchestras, or who work as agents, or in my case, I was department chair. And I saw that very much as a nurturing role, and very much in terms of facilitating and making possible the best work for all of the other members of the department. My own youth was very chaotic, and so I think I'm trying to sort out the various factors, but I think that more has to do with, for instance, I was the oldest of 5, and as the oldest of 5 children, I was most encouraged to study and work hard. But I had a very chaotic kind of upbringing, and so that mitigated against any kind of participation in music, even though I wanted it very early, I wasn't able to do it. So I think it has less to do with gender than with things like social class and where I happened to be born and so forth.
Well, as relative history and also some anecdotal personal contributions to the opening statement of your reaction of the stereotypical view of women in art, how do you feel your pioneering effort? And we know that pioneers are wonderful models, but what we all have to understand is that many pioneers died on the road to the organ, you know, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering with taking on new roles. And it can be a part of the revolution, but in many instances it's the pain of evolution. And what I'm wondering about is in your own personal work and the influences, Lucy pointed a little to a particular moment where she just said, I can't lift this. And I'm more inspired by these things. What perspective do you as a woman bring to your work that you think resonates most with your audience? Because the connection is what eases that pain, your nurturing component.
Who are you asking?
The whole panel. Why don't we start with Janet?
It beats me what people are resonating with in my work. So, you know, I'm not really sure where to go with that. I'm not, I'm not really relating to this.
Okay, we could pay pass is good.
I think that we all just do the best that we can, and the more open and honest you are with what you're trying to do, and don't try to do something that is not right for you, or is not a medium, or a tone, or something that is so far outside of your own experience, your own interests. So you sort of speaking as honestly as you can, as openly as you can, and hope that it reaches somebody. You know, it's very hard to target a specific art audience, and I've never done that. I don't think that I actually could. So what I do is just put it out there with as much integrity as I can. And then, and I don't think, now that's, you know, go to that, I don't think that's necessarily a female trait, but we, you know, so I just think as artists that we, you know, anyway, that's.
Well, I mean, that seems to be a guiding principle of any artist, but also to maintain an integrity, to overcome any stereotypical barriers that you have being a woman. True.
Yeah, and maybe just a little bit about that. Sometimes we feel that, you know, I think it's really important to speak from your own experience, but it isn't only from your own experience. You need to, so you can listen and feel and look and settle and stretch a little bit, so that every single painting, every single piece of music, every single piece of sculpture you make is not about you, but it's the way you see things and the way you react to things, and hopefully that resonates in your audience. And that's, I mean, that's my intention.
Anyone else want to add?
Well, I'll talk about the earlier part of what you were saying. The idea of what did resonate with me was the idea of being a pioneer. I'm not going to call myself like the great pioneer, but I do remember still being, going for my doctorate, beginning my doctoral studies, you know, having my baby. I was, well, actually I had, at one point I began it with one baby and ended with another one, but I had a pouch, you know, a book bag, a pouch with my baby, a book bag on one arm, my notebook in the other, and I was on my way to class, and I still remember thinking, people looking at me like, this was so unusual that this woman wants to, you know, be studying, writing, having a baby, doing it all at once, and thinking, I don't want to give up any of this, and feeling sometimes so ostracized. I still remember people, my father telling me, I'm sure you'll get over this. You know, once you get over this madness, Ruth, you know, not that, I wanted to be a writer since I was 9. In my diary, I wrote, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. When I was 9 years old, I couldn't get it out of my system, obviously. But when I'm being a pioneer, then I had to come up with ways to do this. And there were no role models that I could see, except I remember reading a very scary book by Tilly Olson, who recently died, called Silences, about women who were silenced. And I remember people telling me, wait till your kids grow up. Don't worry, the urge will still be there. Well, guess what? It's not. Too many people have been silenced by that. You can't wait. If you have that hunger to create, you have to do it, you have to do it now. You can't wait for that. So I kept trying, and I remember there were times when it was just almost impossible. With my first child, I'll just tell one anecdote and then move on, but this is something that, I've just never forgotten this. When my baby was like, the first baby was, you know, maybe 8 months or something, and I finally found a babysitter, and all I could afford was to have 2 mornings, 9 to 11, twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday morning. The babysitter lived 15 minutes from my house. I remember driving there the first morning, it was 9, and I realized if I drive back and drive back again, this is like an hour of my 2 hours. So what I did was drop off my son, pull my car down the road a little bit, sit with my notebook and write on the steering wheel till 5 of 11, drive back, pick him up. And I wrote that way for nearly a year, 2 mornings a week, you know, until I could manage more. And so, I mean, it's just you find ways, I guess. So maybe that's part of it. I'm not sure if that answers anything.
Yeah, I would love to jump in, because When both of you were talking about how it's really important just to, even if you're not quite sure what you're doing, to find ways to do it. Sometimes it's, I guess, as a woman, once in a while, when you're very determined to do things that maybe there's not a set way of doing them, I've received feelings of being like just too stubborn or too, I don't know, ambitious even. Somebody said, well, you can't too masculine, or something, something like that. But I think that, you know, Mark and Jeff, the nice gallery assistants here, and curators will attest. I've had meetings when I think, I really want to do this piece, a huge piece, but frame it this way, and I don't really know how, and I haven't figured out a way to do it, and I'm going to do it somehow, by hook or by crook. And I think that often you have to be very self-resourceful and search out people to help you, especially as a woman, because of that reaction that I've received. Sometimes I'm like, oh, just try to make it more manageable or make your project fit into the parameters a little bit better. So it's good to be proactive. It sounded a little bit garbled, and find helpful people to help you. And even if your idea seems very strange, you have to be a pioneer and figure out a way to manifest your idea.
I was just thinking along that. I didn't, in some ways, when I was 15, I worked for a woman sculptor in Bermuda, and she was a real bohemian who had always survived. She always told me that somehow something would always come up, and I have to say for her it always did. But then also, other members of my family were artists, none of them famous, everybody just wanting to do what they wanted to do. And I saw that none of them were rich and that they survived. So that, you know, there were these examples. So in that sense, I was no pioneer. I had examples of people who had gotten along. And then later when I was in New York, I became friendly with Louise Nevelson, and that she was a great example of somebody who really had some problems. And you know, so in different places, I never expected, you know, success at art. I expected to be an artist. That being an artist was that you did make what you wanted to make, and that you probably would not get a lot of attention for it. So that was a good way to start out.
I don't really have anything profound to say about this. I do know that one of my great moments of finding someone who was a pioneer, I thought, or at least in my life, was when I finished undergraduate school. I had majored in music education, figuring that I would go out and save the world the way I had been saved through music, until I student taught, and then I said, get me out of here. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and I ended up working part-time it started off part-time for Joanne Ryle, who is a concert artist manager. And she was an artist first. She went to the University of Pennsylvania and was a painter. And she lived up the street from Natalie Hinderis, who was a black pianist, who was my piano teacher at Temple. And Natalie had asked Joanne to do some publicity work for her. Well, this publicity work turned into doing the contracts, turned into being her full-time manager, turned into developing a roster of artists. And this is also very significant in that Joanne had, as a child, a cleft palate that was not discovered until fairly late, and she had had a number of operations, but her speaking voice is to this day still difficult to understand at times. And she went from being a painter where she could be silent and paint to being a concert artist manager, talking on the phone. And not only did she succeed in this, overcoming this handicap. But she went on to become the president of the Association of Concert Artist Managers. And from starting in her third floor where we worked, she went on to, she does over $1 million in contracts a year and has been a tremendous inspiration to me. She was the first woman that I knew who did it all. She had 4 children, started this business from scratch, was very active politically in her community. So that to me was a pioneer for my life, and I was very fortunate to be able to work with her for 4 years, and it became a full-time job. And that's a lot of what enabled me, I think, to be a department chair, was that I had that experience in management.
Actually, that leads into my next question that I'm always wondering about when I see work and read work and get to know you throughout your research and administrative roles and teaching roles. As women who are artists, creative spirits, nurturers, balancers, jugglers, I mean, personally, I'm still trying to figure out that whole juggling thing with the parent and work and practicing and what's that. But I'm just wondering, what gets you through the hard moments? What inspires you not to create, but to stick to the process? Go ahead, Liz.
I guess, I don't know whether it's inspiration and it's really pedantic, but if I don't get in the studio, I'm miserable. So I have to mush through everything else that I do, and I have to say that it's a lot. It's a lot. Teaching full-time, doing research, doing all the things that we do at a university, as well as having family, and I have 2 grown children now, well, not quite, they're in college, but grown. And so, I mean, all of that, but if it is the thread, besides my relationship with my family, it is the thread that keeps me going. So, and there are a lot of times when I'm in that studio and I'm just writing journals and drawing pictures and you know, chipping on old pieces, etc., and I'm not coming up with new ideas, but I have to be there. I have to just keep doing it. So, I don't know, that didn't answer your question.
No, it
it's
does.
the thing that really keeps me going, and it's one of those things that I guess what I tell people is, if this isn't something that you really have to do, then go find a real job, you know, something. But if it's not something that you really need, that it is the way that you get yourself out there, it's the way you get yourself through the day, then possibly look for another. So that's what I think.
There's, I think it's Oscar Wilde, isn't it the one when a writer came up to Oscar Wilde and said, you know, how did he put it? Do you think I can, should I go on writing? Should I keep on? What do you think? Do I have talent? Should I carry on? And Oscar Wilde said to him, you mean you can quit? You know, it's something that Lucy and I have talked about, our daily routine, and I think I'd have to second that it's the daily experience. I write every day, every morning I have to write, and actually having the children help me find that discipline in the moment. You know, when I had all the time in the world, I didn't write half as much as I write now, when my time is very limited. Like Hamlet, you know, I learned to find eternity in a nutshell. That little hour and a half, you know, can be a long time. But something about getting through the hard times. I remember a professor, when I was in grad school, telling me, you've got talent, but that's nothing. It's almost unimportant in the long run. And I was so depressed when he told me that. What do you mean? And he said, it's the perseverance. Can you hang in there? There are a lot of people with talent who drop along the wayside. And I'm sure this is in every field. Can you carry on no matter what? Can you just keep on, be disciplined? Because it's not always inspiration. Inspiration is such a small part of it. Inspiration comes through the discipline, through being there every day and sitting with that notebook and, you know, wondering, well, today will something come or not? But I remember a story of I mean, there's so many artists I've met through the years. This a visual artist who used to paint, and her husband would, she's actually pretty well known now. Her husband, at the time she was married, her husband forbade her from painting, told her he could, she was supposed to be cooking and everything. So what she would do when she would paint while he was at work, and when she couldn't stop. And when he was coming, she would cook spaghetti sauce to cover the smell of the paint. So that it was always, every time he came home, there were these sauces, garlic sauces bubbling, and, you know, and in the end, she divorced him and kept painting. That's a good, you know. But I also knew a writer whose husband used to take the typewriter and lock it in a closet, you know, so that she couldn't type because it took her away from him, and she gave up. So I think it is a matter of, you have to carry on, no matter what. If you can quit, I guess you will quit. If you're not, you know, kind of bullied into it. But otherwise, you carry on because you must, because it's your life and breath, and because this is, for me, the day when I don't write, I'm hollow inside. I'm really hollow. Something is so urgent, necessary, that I have to. The next day, it's like it's pouring out of me. If I don't, even if it's 10 minutes before a class and I know I have that little time, I have to do it. It's so much a part of my life now that I can't imagine not doing it. So to me, hard times, good times, it's just, this is my constant. It's my food, it's my air, you know.
It's a way of being which maybe you don't have lots of choices about. I mean, there's certainly good things to do in life which are not being an artist, and but for some people, it's more important to let's say, be an artist or to do those things. So for me, it was, and so all along the way, rather than taking on the responsibilities of those awful stories, we got more words. You know, every time I sort of ran into someone who wanted to take over my life, I guess that person got out of my life, and I didn't really have that problem because I didn't let it in for very long. But I wasn't always sure that this was the only path to take in life. I just knew it was the one. I'm not sure that I had, in the end, maybe there weren't that many choices. Maybe this was my path. And, you know, but I wouldn't want to denigrate what other people have chosen. Those other things were more important to me.
Well, I have to say that, unfortunately, unlike my colleagues, every time I have to practice, it seems like, I just dread it. But the advantage of being older is now I know once I get started, it becomes more joyful, and I have a storehouse of experiences of playing with a group of people that is indescribable. So in my teaching, I often, people are fooled by symphony broadcasts, and they think, why don't I play like James Galway or Paul Robeson right away? I mean, it's very, students want to progress very quickly. And I've found that one thing maybe, and most of my students are young women, because they pick the flute, but there are more women now that can relate to a sports analogy. So I try to go through that with them. Like, this is not something that you can just pick up and instantly be talented at. It's a craft and an art as well, and that will pay off. You wouldn't expect to run the 10K just getting up and doing it, and that seems to make a little bit more sense to people, and then you can reap that reward. But it is still hard for me to get going.
I don't know, I just put one foot in front of the other. I think I have been thinking a lot about Amy Beach, who was the first really recognized American woman composer. And she was born in 1867, and from a child, she was a clear child prodigy. She was composing by the age of 4, And her parents recognized that she had perfect pitch and that she could compose away from the piano. She didn't have to be at the piano, but she became a virtuoso pianist. But her parents instilled a great deal of self-discipline in her. But they also controlled her career and would not allow her to go to Europe to study, which is what most people did. She lived in Boston at that time. And she decided to teach herself. She was, in fact, encouraged to teach herself composition. She was obviously a genius because she taught herself composition, counterpoint, and she read orchestration in Berlioz's treatise in French and taught herself how to write for instruments. And she produced the first symphony composed by a woman to be performed in the United States. And that's the symphony that's going to be played here in October by our students. So Amy Beach, at the age of 16, started to give some recitals and had a career of playing for 2 years, but then she married, and she married Mr. H.H.A. Beach. And forever thereafter, she became known as Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. And because of his social position, she was not permitted to perform publicly, except for benefits. About once a year, she performed in benefits. And he was a doctor and on the Harvard faculty and so forth. So it just wasn't the done thing for a woman to perform in public. She continued to do these once-a-year recitals for benefit concerts. But one thing her husband did do, and that was he did encourage her to continue composing. And she composed for all of her life. When her husband died, he was considerably older. When he died, she immediately went to Europe and performed for several years until the outbreak of World War I. And then she came back and then she performed in this country as well. But she did continue composing all her life, and that was something that she was very devoted to. Her parents were very strict with her, but she clearly developed a sense of self-discipline that stayed with her all of her life. And she stuck with that and stuck with composition and with playing the piano, even though she wasn't performing publicly until she could start again. And that's how she overcame it. She just kept at it.
I'm going to change gears just a little bit. And again, this is more of an opinion response that I'm expecting. But in your work or in the work of other artists in multiple mediums that have inspired you or that just kind of hit your memory, is there a perspective that really can be truly represented only by a woman? I mean, I'm thinking specifically about Lucy's exhibit upstairs and what strength, perspective of her work brings to that as a woman. And maybe it's because I'm a woman and I'm relating to it on that level. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is there a work that speaks to you on a heightened level because it was created by a woman? Maybe that's a better phrase.
Well, yeah, I'll probably ramble around too much. But I mean, if I think about different works that I've seen, it would have to be work that I've seen or participated with, etc. That, and whether I can, I'm going to switch this, but whether thinking about particular work that I've seen or participated in or something, not my own work, whether it really mattered to me whether it was made by a woman or if I assumed that it was made by a woman and it wasn't. And there were times when I saw pieces that I thought were just essentially female pieces and then found out later that they weren't. But I think, I don't know, I'm rambling on, but I keep thinking of Nelson now that you brought her up, and her, there was a great little show of hers at the Jewish Museum just recently, And walking through those, the bride's wedding chapel, or whatever the chapel is called, to me that was feminine. It was to me it could have only been done by a woman. It felt so lovely and comfortable and funky and funny, and it was all white. I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah, they're probably, I say in my heart that I respond more to work by other women, but that's not true either. I think
That's the thing you have to be careful about, because, I mean, I think, well, if Roscoe had been a woman, we wouldn't have known about his work.
Right.
And, Nevelson comes out of, Duchamp and some of those people, so it's, each person is unique, and yet I don't want to make this all too narrow, because we're all people, too. I know, but I don't want to, from that,
I think, yeah, I'll go back and sort of, for the particular piece that I did upstairs, I would not have done that piece that way if I were any other person or if I were a man. And I was not trying, and I remember one of the conversations I had when I put it up and talked to the volunteers here was, I was questioned and said, there are men that are victims of domestic violence as well. And I said, absolutely, I know that, and boys and everything. But that wasn't what I was investigating. What's interesting to me in terms of the investigation was a particular aspect of women's lives that was so confusing to me, and I needed to sort it out. Now, I haven't sorted it out, and I'll never sort it out, but it was a way for me to negotiate that and to do it. So I was using my own sensibility, what I've read, research, contact with people, and all of that, and it was really from a very sort of strong feminist and female perspective, and I don't think I could have done the work in another way. So I didn't answer, but anyway.
No, you did. Do you think she answered it? Ruth, are there any female writers that you think really bring a woman's perspective in their writing to sort of illuminate a little bit more of the women's issue?
Yeah, while this has been going on, I was thinking about the first writer that I deeply, deeply fell in love with, and that's Colette, the French writer. My first language is French. As Sheila said, I was born in Morocco, and I'm a Jew from Morocco, and a Sephardic Jew. And so a lot of the early influences I had, I guess maybe the reason I wanted to be a writer in the first place was to give voice. And I thought about that too when I saw Lucy's exhibit, but to give voice to people whose voices you don't usually hear. And for me, it was Jewish voices often, especially voices from North Africa, where my culture, where I came from, and women's voices. And they all sort of started merging, voices that just weren't heard. And when I read Colette, it was an awakening for me. I was really young and really precocious as a reader, and I was reading, I think I read Lady Chatterley's Lover when I was like 12, and I didn't understand anything, but I loved it. And I knew enough to read it in the dark, with a flashlight in my bed. But Colette did the same thing to me. She was so sensual and earthy and matter of fact about sex and women and life, and I remember just being astounded by her and thinking, this is it. This is what I need to do. This is what I'm going to do. I can put this in words, this way of connecting to the world and responding and feeling and touching and everything. This is my way. So the fact that she could do it, and the more I learned about her, that she lived this full, sensual, rich life, that her last words were astonishment. These last flashes of astonishment are what I cannot do without. I mean, that to me says so much. So yeah, she touched me a lot, and since then there have been many, many women writers.
On female musicians, they found that the percentage of increase in female musicians in professional orchestras is between 30% and 55%. So when this began in the early 70s. And they now professional practices, preliminary candidates, I've experienced this, you're not allowed to wear high heels, nothing that will give away your gender, age, race, status, anything. And it's quite surprising, and they found that overall the percentage of women, not only in, as I was saying before, gender-specific, stereotypical sections of the instruments have increased, but overall there's been a huge increase. There was a very disturbing article that I read about orchestras in Europe, particularly the Vienna Philharmonic, has been very misogynistic, and members of the orchestra are quoted about one person, Helmut Zehetner, a second violinist in the Vienna Philharmonic, was asked about the possible entry of women into the orchestra. They have one member who is a harpist now. His comments were, no, truthfully said, I wouldn't be indifferent. I would have an uneasy feeling in the situation. And that is because we would be gambling with the emotional unity that this organization has. My worry is that it will be a step that could never be taken back. And amen. It would be a step.
And the Vienna is the most egregious example of this, but this has, of course, been going on. In the early 20th century, women tried to make some inroads. Eventually what happened was they formed their own orchestras, and there were a great many women's symphonies throughout the country until World War II. And then when all of the men were called away, women started to get positions in the major orchestras, and then it did begin to change. But all of the same arguments about a woman, you can't imagine having them in the orchestra, they don't have the endurance, they don't have the strength, and certainly they don't want to play wind instruments that will upset their pretty faces. And in 1904, the Musicians Union affiliated with the AFL. And as a result of that, they were forced to accept women on an equal basis. And so there was they found ways around it, of course, but there was a terrific backlash, and there were all kinds of comments similar to the way Vienna behaves today, but it's the same sort of thing, that women should not be in the orchestra.
Geez, you think we've come so far and yet not quite. Well, I want to open up the opportunity for anyone to ask the panel questions here. Burning desires to know hidden secrets of femininity.
I have a question. I used to subscribe to a newspaper which had a weekly feature about one artist of the community. It was a community of very many artists in the Hamptons, as a fact. And but the person doing the interviewing didn't ask what I think are the two most important questions to ask of an individual artist, which you all qualify for. But the questions that I think he should have asked, and I don't think there's any reason for you to go into details. So the question he should have asked was A, tell me about your childhood trauma. Because, if you're doing a longer piece about an individual artist, because it seems to me all artists are made through their childhood trauma. And the number two question is, how do you keep going financially? Do you have family money? Do you have a job? Are you married to a doctor? Those are interesting questions.
Did you say trauma? Trauma?
Trauma.
No, I'm sorry, I had a really lovely childhood. I did. But what I will say about my childhood is the way that I learned to draw was that my mother was a portrait painter, and she did it in the dining room. We never had meals in the dining room. She used the studio. It was her studio, and I had that dining anyway, she would do these portraits, and I would go in and draw and paint on them. And when I figured out I actually had gotten to the point where I was good was when she didn't notice anything. So that is her trauma. And the way I support myself is I'm a university professor and it's my day job, and I have taught full-time almost every single year since I finished graduate school in 1974. So I've been working, I mean, that's how I support myself. So no family money. My husband is not a doctor, he's a painter and is, so, no, sorry.
Anyone else? It sometimes could be a very deeply personal question. So, it's a good question, but I don't know who gets to ask it. So, anyone else wants to respond, please do.
Well, I'll just briefly, as I said, being an immigrant child, first-generation immigrant, I learned English. I had to learn English, and I learned it through books, through reading, and so language became my first real communication. I still remember learning to read English and wanting to enter the book, wanting to enter the picture and the words, and putting my finger in, like wanting so much to be part of that world. So books to me were my first friends. I mean, they really were my first way of connecting. But what you brought up about the finances is something I wanted to mention, actually, in response to one of Janet's comments earlier, that one of the things about being a woman in the arts is the fact that not only are you a woman, but you're a woman artist, and an artist is already such an uncertain career. It is a career that you know pretty early on, unless you're one of the rare ones, you won't be making much money for it. You won't have something concrete to show maybe for many years. I mean, an artist, a visual artist, will have something more to show that, like if you're a novelist, it can take years for something concrete to be there, for stories to be published. My first story published, I got a check for $10. And the editor wrote me a note, go out and have a night on the town. My first story. So I met, you know you're not going to make much money. So like Lucy, I teach, I've worked constantly, I do readings, I do workshops, I do all kinds of things, but that makes it harder sometimes to make it in that world. That's why I'm never going to denigrate someone who doesn't continue on this road. It really is, you can't live without this. But yeah, money's not why you do it. You find ways.
No, because I mean, when I was starting out, I wasn't, first of all, I couldn't get any teaching jobs because they weren't really hiring women. And even as somebody said later on when Women's Lib started, even your alma mater, which would have been Smith, wasn't hiring women. And it actually was, as the years went by and they would do those stunning phone calls, I would say, do you have more than 1.5 women teaching in the art department yet? But it wasn't so easy, which just meant that, you had to live rough. On the other hand, I certainly had a lot of other friends doing the same thing, which sort of made for a community. But I do remember talking an entire high school class out of going into art as a career because they were so horrified about how difficult it was to support yourself.
Do you want to talk about your traumas?
My traumas. Well, when I was about 6 years old, I had a friend down the street whose family had a piano, and she was taking piano lessons, and I used to make her teach me her piano lessons. And we then my father was an alcoholic, and so he went through a series of jobs and non-jobs, and so we started moving. And so I no longer had my neighbor to teach me piano, so I had to play on a flutophone. I don't know if any of you remember flutophones, but I had a flutophone, and I played from an old songbook, and I did this for hours at a time. But the alcoholism was something that made life pretty miserable for quite a long time. And so I ended up putting myself through school, and I certainly didn't have family money, and and through graduate school, and yeah, that was it.
Well, I'm going to preserve my mysterious trauma. But the money thing is definitely true. Boy, a lot of pennies have I counted out in rolls with my husband, musician too. And it definitely, I think it's like we were talking about before, you just have to find a way. You have to learn how to type. Thank God I took 8th grade typing and have through the years, maybe every single moment was not spent making artwork or practicing, but I could eat and, didn't owe anybody anything, and I could do what I wanted to do. So it's, yeah, financially, it's a different world, I think, for a while anyway at the beginning.
Have organizations like National Museum of Women in the Arts made a difference for you in the arts at all?
No. Well, unfortunately, I'm a realist painter. For a while, the curator said there was a curator who hated realism, so it didn't help me any. But maybe, I think things are better now than they were in the 60s, for instance. Let's just hope they keep getting better.
The one thing actually that I don't think has changed enough is the number of, you're mentioning that one museum, the number of major museums that collect women's work, and it's still not high enough.
It's still pretty pathetic.
Yeah, it's really pathetic, and that's the shock.
Also, if you look at auction records, it's women are going to be very down.
Yeah, the amount of money that a woman's painting will, or sculpture, or whatever, will go for it compared to, this is sort of historical pieces. They are starting to collect more, a little bit more in terms of contemporary work for women, but it's still got a long way to go, and that's a big issue. And you can go through the same thing. You can look through gallery shows and see who's having one-person shows. You look at the guides of the galleries and who they handle, and it's, that there are as many women artists out there as there are men, but the galleries are handling predominantly male. There are a few that make an effort, and it's a larger percentage of women, but it's still too low.
I'm going to ask you a question. An awful lot of galleries are owned or run by women. So,
One would think, wouldn't you? Sorry.
The question is, a lot of galleries are owned and operated
No,
by
I didn't even let you finish.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, the question.
well, that just sort of surprises me. I should be aware of it, but I wasn't thinking about it.
It's society. You're dealing with, society changes so slowly. When did we get the vote? Not that long ago when you come down to it. And, it's just, my grandmother wrote poetry, but she never showed it to anybody. And, my mother gave up her career for marriage. And now, it's not, that was more expected then. There were a few who, like Louise Nevelson, who didn't. But it was, society is a big, heavy thing that moves slowly.
And I think it's bottom line is money, and collectors. And although, and there are a lot of collectors that know what they want, there are also a lot of collectors that hire an agent to tell them what to buy. And they're not buying what they like, they're buying what is a good investment. And most people, I'm probably really wrong here, very biased, but a lot of people that buy art, that are buying art, expensive art, are not buying what they like. They're buying what will be a good investment. And so the prices are set, and it sort of perpetuates itself. Now that there are collectors that collect people's work that they like, there are collectors that will follow an artist and try and help them to establish themselves, and there are some galleries that really will look for young and starting artists, and there are particular gallery owners that are really looking for women and trying to help them. But it's a very small minority.
I think in the interest of time and the mass exodus that's about going right now, we'll take one more question and then we'll wrap it up, and hopefully you'll have a chance to go upstairs and enjoy the exhibits. Yes?
There's been a big rift in women that have made the first progressive movement, and now women coming through the college years in town. And I ask, artists, do they, when they're trying to put their work out there, are you still intentionally trying not to pigeonhole yourself as a woman artist? Or are you very protective of your name in terms of organizations like NAP? Can you turn off on your resume? How is it that you keep that balance? Other organizations that you don't have to get specific as to what you do network, but are there ones where you definitely keep away in the interest of preserving your own work and your name?
Can you repeat the question?
I asked, do these artists still look towards protecting their name and their work with certain organizations and connections, so they're not pigeonholing themselves? Because that's been a big issue for women, especially women of minority backgrounds.
I think that I actually have erred on the side of being blatant. So I put it in there as much as possible. I was a member of a women's cooperative gallery for years. It was a way to preserve my sanity. I was in an all-male department here, and no offense, Ricardo. And I drove to Philadelphia, twice a week with nursing babies to go down there and be in a women's cooperative. I was really active in the Women's Caucus for Art. I've always been a member of NOW. All of those things were things that, and I put them on my Lehigh stuff. So whenever I'm, out there and doing something for Turning Point or something, I put it out there. And I also have been affiliated with Women's Studies programs, so that has sort of helped a little bit from that point. But I think that there are women, and there's a big issue. Do you want to be, and it's always happened. We were just I'm teaching a class on women artists. We just covered like one of the expositions. There was a women's pavilion, and there were women that did not want to be ghettoized by putting their work in the women's pavilion. They wanted to be in the grand pavilion where the men were exhibited as well. There are other women that absolutely, this is it, I'm going to put my work in there and I'm proud to do it, put it in the other place too. So I think that that's something that's a personal choice. If there's an organization that's going to discriminate against you now because you're a woman or because you're a woman of color or you're a minority male, then you just get their name and you find out who the hell they are and do something about it. Because there are, it's not a comfortable place for them to be. They're not really supposed to be able to do that. So, but on the other hand, there are lots of people that use their initials. There are women that have used men's names, etc.
I don't think it's as important to do that anymore. No. I don't think it's necessary at this point. It might have been like 30 years ago, but not now.
It is happening still with women composers, though. Composition is still an area that is not that well represented with women composers who've made any big impact anyway. And so in competitions and things like that, they're often they will use a gender-neutral name or initials to submit stuff.
Well, I think we'll just wrap this up, and I want to thank the panel for their